So you've lived in Japan, you've lived in Turkey, you've lived in Germany and Spain. If you can just give a little insight as to what it was like living in each one of the countries that you were able to teach in.
Sure. So basically, Japan, I was lucky enough to be posted in Tokyo. And as a New Yorker, that really was good. So, my lifestyle was really, I mean, it was fantastic out there. The problem now, Kim was just talking about if you go to countries where the dollar is stronger, right? But I mean, in Japan, it wasn't like that much. The difference
Right.
in terms of that, and definitely in Europe, it was like higher than the dollar. So that was something that maybe I could have done differently. Is gone to a less expensive country or area. Okay, where
Okay.
was I living? I was living in Berlin. Okay, Berlin, Germany. All right. And in
What about
Barcelona,
Turkey?
Spain.
What
And
Turkey?
Turkey, yes. Okay, that was
Okay.
one where the dollar was stronger.
Okay.
Okay, that was one. All right. Yes, yes. Um, but so I want to say, yeah, Tokyo, I had a really dynamic experience out there. I found the Japanese people, the culture, everyone there was just like insanely friendly. I remember my first few days there when I was still trying to figure things out. And, this was before like Google Maps and, you could just click, click, click and understand where you were going. Like, so I was looking at like maps and things like that, or I would come to the train, the first couple of days trying to figure out how to maneuver things. And people would come up to me. Japanese people would come up to me. The first time it happened, I was like in the train station of the first area where I was living, and somebody was like, "Oh, are you okay? Do you understand what you need to do?" And
Wow.
as a New Yorker, I was like, "Huh? What?"
Why are you talking to me?
Yeah, I mean, nobody has
Right.
ever in New York City seen me and look confused and be like, "Oh, do you need some help with something? Do you understand where you're going? Did you got it?" So I was kind of like shocked by that, but I was just like, "No, I think I'm okay," trying to figure things out. And part of it is because of the politeness, etc. But another part of it was that they wanted to practice their English. Okay. They
Oh,
were like,
yeah.
clearly, this is a foreigner, probably speaks English. Okay. And so they were like, yeah, yeah, we're going to practice our English. And so they talked to me for a little bit after that. And, a lot of that happened, though. A lot of that happened. I would be like looking up because a lot of things were kind of like built up. I mean, up instead of across, I guess I want to say in Tokyo, in terms of like buildings and the numbers and understanding where to go. So anyway, I would be looking up and they would be like, "Oh, do you know where you are? Do you need some help with the, directions?" Like,
Right.
so I had a great experience there. I also met quite a few other Black women out there who, to this day, I'm really close friends with. Someone I met out there that lives in Westchester.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and when I had first moved out there, I was living in the Bronx before I moved to Japan, and so I met her at like a foreigner bar,
Wow.
and of course, the brown people, the Black people, we're like, "Oh,
Travel.
ooh, ooh."
Right.
Okay, so that's what happened, and we talked, and yeah, we're still friends to this day. So, and then I met other Black women out there, and I actually had a friend of mine here in the States was like, "Oh yeah, one of my friends is coming out there, like her boyfriend's a musician, yada yada. Anyway, why don't you guys meet up?" So I met up with her, and then I took her out with like my crew. And she was
Oh,
like, "Who
wow.
knew?" So many, this was a Black woman. She was working at BET actually at the time. And so she was like, "Who knew there were like so many brown people out here?
Wow.
Black people, brown people out here, just kind of doing things." So, and in terms of how the Japanese people received me, I mean, I felt welcomed. As I said, I felt actually like a prize out there. I really felt like a prize.
I hear amazing things about Tokyo. People in Tokyo are similar to people in New York, that they're about their business, but they also have a distinction in that they will stop and talk to you and help you if you seem to be in distress. So can you tell us about
Yeah,
Turkey, Spain,
sure.
and Germany?
Okay, so I'll just do it like a brief rundown of those. So, yeah, Turkey was the next country. And actually, I was working at a university out there. So, I was working on campus. Okay,
Okay.
so I mean, I lived on campuses. I lived and worked on campus. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, coming from New York and then Tokyo, that was a tough transition because I actually worked in Ankara, so I wasn't in Istanbul.
I heard that.
I actually went with just, it was like, I worked at Bilkent University, which is a prestigious private university in Turkey, but it is in the capital. A lot of people liken Ankara and Istanbul to like New York and DC in terms of the vibes. So a
Okay.
lot of people kind of do that. For me, Ankara was a bit slow in terms of transportation. You know, I lived on campus, so when I wanted to go quote unquote into the city, which was really like a small town, I the bus, I think it ran once an hour in order to get into to the downtown, which was, you know,
Yeah.
not that
Real.
robust, I'll say. You know, the transportation in general was just really nothing I had ever seen before, because the buses, I mean, they didn't really like run on like real schedules, I guess, kind of. They were kind of running. I mean, once you got into the city, they would maybe sometimes stop places. And sometimes, I guess, if someone asked them to stop somewhere else, they would stop somewhere. I mean, I had never seen that type of organization, I'll say.
Okay. Okay.
um, so I was a bit thrown off by, you know, a few things in terms of that, and the lifestyle was a bit you know, a bit too, I guess I want to say, sedentary for me, day to day. Again, I didn't like, if I didn't really have like quick access to like go somewhere, you know, like pop in, fun, interesting. What I did appreciate about my experience in Turkey was my professional development there, because
Okay.
I was able to teach at it. That's part of the reason why I went to Turkey, is because you're able to teach at a university there without a master's degree. I did not have my master's
Oh,
degree
wow.
yet. I
Yeah.
did have my CELTA.
Okay. But
So I did, you be okay, because that was important to be able to work at a university, right? So, but I didn't have a master's degree, and I was able to work at a prestigious university in Turkey, and I really learned a lot about the way that they kind of view education, and the way that their instructors work together. I had a very positive, extremely positive professional experience there, and I definitely would recommend it if that's, you know, they gave me. So whereas in Japan, I got an apartment, but they set me up in it, but then they were like taking money out of my check to
right.
pay for it, like
Right.
that. Here, I had the apartment. The apartment was free. The apartment was given to me.
Okay.
Not only that, I think in Japan I had a roommate or something. I had my own apartment in Turkey, and they also afforded for you to live, you know, to have a, if you brought like family, they could accommodate that too. Okay, so for me,
Wow.
like if you're, depending on what stage you are in your life, and you know, for me, I was still consider myself a young, you know, whippersnapper. I wanted to be kind of with more action going on, but you know, we at the time we had like 9 weeks of vacation or something. It was like insane. We had a stipend, you know, like for lunch or food or whatever it was.
Okay.
So they paid for the transportation. So we were really, you know, set up well in terms of professionalism. Now, in terms of my treatment, you know, being a Black woman, um, they don't really see a lot of Black people out there. That's the end. That's like period. Okay.
So it's not like DC Chocolate City, then that's what you're saying.
I mean, and I'm gonna just tell us a little story because they weren't used to seeing this. I mean, I was at the bus stop with my colleague, with my Turkish colleague. We were, chopping it up, whatever, talking. And another woman stepped up to the bus stop and she was like staring. She was staring. So I kind of looked at her like, like, okay, what's going on here? What's. And so then she was like, your skin is so pretty. Your skin is so nice. And I said, thank you. But then I went back to my conversation. Then she did.
To touch it.
Yeah, she did. And I was like, no. It was kind of like, and I'm not saying anything kind of disparaging. It's like it was something very different for her and she didn't know how to react. And that's kind of what she did. And
does it come off? Is it?
I mean, she just, I don't know what she was expecting to find out. I don't know what she was expecting to find out by touching, but I didn't allow that to happen because it was too strange for me. I was like, what's going on here? But on the other end of that, of course, I traveled when I was in Turkey, right? So on the other end of that, when I went to Istanbul, I mean, even, I took a bus out there. My colleague didn't like planes. We took a buses to travel. Okay. Anyway, so, and, on the way, or would have a stop and, the women, they would be like high-fiving me or be like, oh, can I take a picture with you? And, this type of thing. So, it was kind of like I was like a novelty out there, but at the same time, sometimes it would be a little unnerving to have those things happen, which is the complete opposite of what went on when I went to Berlin. When I went to Berlin, nobody was stripping off anything. Everyone was doing their thing, hanging out on, on the train, whatever it was. It was like I was just a regular person person hanging out there doing my thing. So, but I appreciated that because it was different from what happened in Turkey and what happened in Japan. Now, even though Japan, it wasn't like a situation where they're trying to touch your skin. It was still like, wow, and I would get different things. Oh, are you Jamaican? Are you this? Are you, try to be, but it was still, of course, I stood out there and I stood out in Berlin. I didn't stand out there. Now, go ahead. If you had a question or if somebody had a question before I continue about Berlin.
No, go ahead about Berlin, then go about Spain. And if anyone does have a question, now is the time to put it in the chat. I have one or two more questions for Yasmin after this, but again, I put across the screen, she will be available. You could pick her brain, find out more about certifications, find out more about the country she's taught in. But go ahead and share your experience. You finish sharing your experience about Berlin, and then I don't think we touched on Spain. And then we'll get to some questions from the audience.
Okay, great. So Germany is actually, I want to say, I mean, Japan is like really close to my heart. That was my first country that I lived in. But I had the best experience in Berlin. I mean, I really did. And I had no idea that I would. But the thing that I did, I was kind of obsessed with learning some German, with understanding the culture, understanding where I would need to live. So this was my third time around the block. Okay. So I was like, let's understand some more before we go there. All right. Okay. Not only that, I mean, there were certain visas available, but you had to show up there first. So I showed up in Germany with no job. I had no job. I was like, look, I have a lot of experience. They're going to hire, somebody's going to hire me. And
wow.
with very little, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying, what a leap of faith. That's amazing. Go ahead.
I showed up with maybe, I hate to admit this, but I only had like maybe two months of savings. Okay. And I showed up because and I'm wondering if this agreement is even still going on. A lot has been changing around, but you could show up in a member of the EU, the country, for 3 months on a tourist visa, right? So you could be a tourist there, you could show up, you don't have to do anything, just show up, and you could be there for 90 days before they would be like, look, what's happening here? You need to return. So knowing that, I knew that once I got there, if I could prove that I could be hired or I had some kind of contract signed from companies, that I would be able to then get a work visa there. So I moved there. Before I moved there, I was, learning some German.
Ein, zwei, drei, vier, fünf. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, you're doing the numbers. Okay.
My father loved Germany, and he taught us a lot of German words when we were growing up, but he was stationed there for when he was young. So
wait, who was? I missed it.
My dad.
Oh wow, nice. So yeah, and then when I got there, I studied. I was like, I gotta keep myself active. Got an Airbnb. Studied in a school that I had heard about from a trip I took to Spain, where I met a bunch of Germans that encouraged me to actually go to Germany. This is how I started it. Okay. Had a big birthday. I went to Spain for 1 month, and I met a bunch of people, and then I went to a German, what is the island again? Mallorca, yeah. And where there's a lot of Germans there, and this is how I got the inkling. Oh, let me go teach in Germany. Anyway. So in Germany, I was studying German at a school. I signed up for a couple months. It's like a week after I got there, I was on the grind, sending out resumes, and knocking on doors, because you could still do that. I moved there in 2016, and they were still okay with people showing up in person with their resume. Here it is, and by the time, because before the 3 months, okay, I needed to show I could be hired, and basically I got my interviews in, and 3 different language schools had given me contracts to be able to work part-time, for them basically. So when it was time for my appointment, I was like, yeah, here are the contracts, and that's kind of how I work. I ended up working there, and I met, there were so many, whatever you're into, you can find there, right? I mean, I like hip hop a lot. So there were so many, I want to say hip hop events. There's but there was a large African population as well. That was just great. And I felt, really pretty much at home there. I mean, of course, there were a lot of different little things I needed to get used to. In addition, I am pescatarian. I've been pescatarian forever. I think, yeah, forever. Maybe 20 plus, a long time. And I was scared about that when I went out there, because primarily I'm mostly vegetarian. Sometimes I eat seafood. So, but excellent place. If you have dietary anything, vegan, they had loads of vegan stuff, loads of, loads of healthy. I mean, if you're into that, you could get that there too. So I felt like this is great. I really had an excellent and amazing time in Germany.
Good. And Spain?
Yeah. So lastly, now, as I just mentioned, I took a trip to Spain for a month. It was a birthday, a big birthday thing I did for myself, because I had actually never spent time in a Spanish speaking country, despite having studied Spanish, et cetera. Right. So I said, let me go out there and study and bone up on my Spanish. And it was just, I fell in love with Barcelona. I fell in love with the whole vibe. And I said, I have to live here legally. I mean, I have to live here at some point. I have to live here. So how did I go about doing that? For all I said about Berlin, the weather wasn't the best. So I was really kind of ready to go to some sunshiny shores, I'll say.
Okay.
All right. So what I did was I decided to get my master's degree. And I decided to get my master's degree at the University of Barcelona. So that is how I was able to, to live there. Yeah, so I went through that process. It was quite a process, changing over and whatever. Some papers needed updating, but I was living in Germany when I was doing this. I didn't come back to the States. So whatever I was doing, I had to be like doing it from Germany and getting my stuff, my papers together, whatever I had to do. Transcripts from, people back here and stuff. So I did that. So mainly when I was living in Spain, I was studying. I did a Swift 1 year program. I didn't want to extend too much beyond that just because I was I didn't want to be studying in anybody's school I was at the age where I was like, yeah, I want this, but I don't want to extend. I don't want to be on a 2 year situation studying.
Right.
So I 1 year studied there. In terms of teaching, I feel like a lot of Americans out there, they get like jobs tutoring. So I was a private tutor for these adorable little girls. One was like 12 and one was like 6 or so. And so that was, in terms of like the work, and a lot of people that were out there, Americans, or because my program was actually international, so we had people in the program that also that English wasn't their first language necessarily. But if you were American, I knew quite a few other Americans out there that got tutoring, and that was through basically like the university. Some people like knew other people who needed some help, in terms of tutoring. And so that was the scene out there.
That's big in Mexico too, private tutoring. There's a lot of, I lived in Guadalajara for a little while and a lot of universities there. And even when I lived there, I'd be at a cafe and someone speaking Spanish would come up to me and be like, and have a note from like the university, like they want to have a conversation because it's part of their course requirement, right?
Uh-huh.
And I also knew people that started their own business doing private tutoring because it was such a need. And this was 2023 and 2020
Last year. No, 2 years ago. Wow,
years
we're
ago.
in 2025.
I know, right? Exactly. Yasmin is a wealth of knowledge on how to properly prepare to teach abroad. Her information and access to her consultations are below.